All right, welcome to IT Trendsetters. Hey, today we're here with Peter. Peter, can you give us a little bit about your background and the company you're with?
Yeah, absolutely. Pete Doggart, I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at a company called Armis. I've been in cyber and networking for 20 plus years and done everything from startups to public companies and running product organizations through to business development and just enjoying the ride.
So I was doing a little bit of internet stalking before this started, and according to LinkedIn, you've been all over the world, and basically you've played every single role that possibly could be played in the technology sector. So can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's somewhat true. Everything from the engineering days back in 3Com, actually pioneering some of the protocols and developments. Actually, I have a patent in a technology called Power over Ethernet that many people use today, and got into the world of security pretty early on because we thought back in the day, security and networking should come together as one unified system. And I just fell in love with the cyber world, with security. And from there on out, I got stuck in and, as you say, did everything from the marketing side of the house to both product development and product management through to business development. So
cool. And you're living in Wisconsin now, from Boston before that. I mean, pretty much every coast and every place in between.
Yeah, I did follow my wife. So it was, we were living in London at the time and we decided to move to the States, and we bounced around the States a bit, from Chicago to Boston, back to Madison, Wisconsin. And I think literally over the past 20 years, I must have flown something in the region of sort of 2 to 3 million miles, just bouncing back and forth and, really driving this whole sort of cyber world forwards. It's been a lot of fun.
Nice. Kirk, where are you today? Florida?
No, I'm in Wisconsin, the Milwaukee
you're in Wisconsin.
So we're about 60 miles apart here. We're not very far apart at the moment. But,
nice.
Yeah, that voice doesn't sound like native Madison.
No, born in the UK, actually, near to Manchester.
So the big piece on that whole part that I find maybe the unique background that Armis brings to the table, more of the IoT starting out, and maybe explain how that plays into an advantage maybe of where the world's kind of headed.
Yeah, so Armis is really looking at the world very, very broadly. What we're bringing to the table here is a complete and unified and authoritative view, for the first time really, of every single asset in every domain, every industry. And we see IoT as just a piece of that bigger picture. In fact, IoT is so amorphous, really, in its definition. It's hard to pin down what is IoT, really. So what we like to think about is the world of the asset. And the asset is literally anything connected. It can be a PC or a server or a cloud workload. It can be a sensor. It can be a PLC. It can be an infusion pump. It can be a camera. It's literally anything connected. And we are seeing an explosion. Just to give you an idea, in 2022, we've got roughly about 23 to 24 billion assets in the world connected. In about 2 to 3 years, that's going to go to 50 billion. So we've literally, from the entire time we've been in existence, we've developed, over decades, 25 billion devices, and literally in 2 years, we're going to double that. That is a cause for concern, in my opinion, because we are adding so many new assets. And what does that do to IT? What's it do to cyber?
Yeah, it's almost the footprint is almost hard to comprehend the quantity and level we're dealing with. So when we talk about that external footprint, that you hear this term attack surface management, it's almost, to me, feels like the days of when people had IDS budgets. Everybody's using that term attack surface at this point. So how do you get above that noise? Like a lot of the platform players we'll say they have an attack surface management component or the scanners.
Mhm.
How do you take that to your advantage or get through the confusion that there's so many different parts of attack surface? How do you focus in on what's different and important?
Yeah, the way we look at the world actually is going back to the fundamentals. And how we try to help our clients is it's frankly all about visibility. If you don't have the visibility, you cannot make the right decisions in IT or in cybersecurity. So obviously we're going back in time, if you will, to the basics, because we've seen this influx in new assets. A lot of times CISOs and CIOs come to us and go, tell us what we have. We don't have an accurate inventory. Our CMDB is completely useless at the moment. Tell us what we have, and then start to overlay context on top of that. So I think that's the core differentiation. Yes, everyone has some form of attack surface X, but if you don't fundamentally understand what you have and the context of what you have and what those things are doing, you cannot comprehend what are these things doing to my organization.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. And I got collided here with about 10 different questions in my own brain here, but I think the big part, I'll take a reset on this part, but yeah, the part I think that's really interesting is we're kind of aware of, the unknown assets, the explosion in the assets. But one of the things that you guys really are focusing on also, or Armis is focusing on, is kind of the secondary asset. You want to talk about that? What is the assets within the assets, I guess, are really where the devil becomes in the details.
Yeah, there's, if you think about the asset, there's a level of depth, I'd say, to an asset. I'll give you an example. In the medical field, a lot of medical devices probably use some form of Windows or some form of Linux. You can have a big MRI machine. Yeah, it comes from Philips or Siemens or whatever. It's probably running a version of probably Windows 10 or Windows XP. So kind of unwrapping that to say, yeah, I know that this is an MRI machine. I know it's located here. I know it's scanning. I know it's scanning a left arm right now, and it's running this version of operating system. Mm-hmm. It's that depth and level that Armis goes to. And then you can start to overlay, okay, now I know what it is. I know it's working. I know it's, you can start to overlay, is there an FDA recall on this thing? Are there vulnerabilities? Are those vulnerabilities exploitable? And if they are, what risk does it have to my patients? So it's going down the stack of that context we spoke about and adding in those layers, which is so, so critical. Right.
And then how do you play it in? A lot of these have to have compensating controls because you can't patch them and things like that. So how does that layer into the strategy of how do you get, once you have this visibility, understanding the paths to that visibility, and how do you put controls in to protect things that you can't use traditional, well-developed tools like you have in the PC world?
Yeah, absolutely. So the three things that we always tell people that Armis do is you discover the assets, you understand the asset and the priorities of potential risks, and then you do something about it. Mm-hmm. And that can be a multitude of things. You can kick off a additional scan with Qualys. You can update the ITSM tools in ServiceNow. You can open an incident ticket. And now, to your point about resolution and remediation, absolutely. We want to use what the clients have already invested in. They already have compensating controls. They've already got next-gen firewalls. They've already got probably some form of access control systems. But it's important to take all this intelligence from Armis and employ that in a sort of centralized policy so that we're making a good decision based upon the context and intelligence that we're giving. So another example is, we saw a infusion pump. It was in a hospital. It was actually, we saw it connected to a patient. It was turned on, and we saw malware on that infusion pump. And it was, we thought, hang on a second. What do you do in this circumstance? Do you just turn off that infusion pump? No, you don't. So if you give that context over to the medical facility and say, hey, go send down a nurse to sit with the patient. And then once we disconnect the patient, then go quarantine that device and send it back for remediation purposes. So that level of context, again, feeds into the remediation aspects of what we do.
That makes a lot of sense. So kind of that back to the basics like you were mentioning, like today, at the end node for PCs, you have all these advanced, we call it EDR,
yep.
Node detection and response capabilities, your CrowdStrikes, your Sentinel-1s, your Microsoft Defender, but none of those, you can't apply those, you can't put those kind of controls on these IoT devices. So now you almost have to go back to where the PC world was maybe 10 years ago and start working your way back, like you said, to the basics of how do you protect these things, because those are total holes in the world of those tools. That's
right. For 95%, and it's growing that ratio between managed, where you can put an agent on it versus unmanaged. We just can't have an agent because the permutations of operating systems and devices is massive. We are tracking somewhere in the magnitude of 20 million different types of things that we're seeing. So you can't have 20 million permutations of agents and then somehow figure a way to work with the manufacturer to get this built into the operating system. It's just not practical at the end of the day.
Right. So it sounds like, how do you see this whole industry kind of evolving? Before I jump to that real quick, the whole other component here we should talk about is post-pandemic and all the interesting challenges the work at home environment is really presenting. A lot of people kind of gloss over that right now, because they don't have a great answer, I think, for some of the challenges. What are you guys seeing? What do you think a good strategy is for addressing that?
So in post-pandemic world, what we saw was the acceleration of a porous perimeter where folks were working from home and they will continue to work from home and utilize SaaS tools. They will access workloads, they'll access content. The way we work now will fundamentally and has changed. So what's that do to communications? What's it do to how we connect our assets together? And it's created a secondary concern for many folks where we're attaching other assets to our corporate systems. We're attaching these third-party systems. I was with, I can't mention the name unfortunately, but I was with a client of ours, and we can query everything that's connected to their environment. And they found that in all their little satellite offices, people were plugging in a access point, and that access point was connecting to a ton of other stuff that was connecting to other stuff. So you start to create this chain of impacts, and without a tool like Armis, you cannot see that. You do not understand what's connecting, why it's connecting, what it's connecting to. So post-pandemic, we will see this explosion again, and explosion through our perimeter to the far reaches of our extremities. So it is a cause for concern for sure.
So given this explosion in all the IoT, and who knows, like you said, it's going to accelerate, probably doubling the amount of IoT devices for the foreseeable future as more and more intelligent IT devices for everything in the world. Everything's going to be IT driven, controlled by some cloud component. And I mean, that's just the model of world development now. If you had to put on your crystal ball, where do you see this headed in the next few years? And what are the critical things if I'm looking to bring a tool in-house? What do I really need to be thinking about? Like an evaluator's guide, what would be my critical checklist of things that I would need if I'm a large enterprise?
So looking at the future here, we have to consolidate and rationalize the amount of data we're seeing in our environments. At the moment, we have too much noise in the system. And with noise comes many, many problems. So I would say, crystal ball, we need to find systems that can help us correlate, aggregate, normalize, rationalize all that data into something which is more actionable. Of course, this is becoming a big problem because we're seeing so much more things coming into our systems, more assets, across our environment. So we need to solve for that. We need to solve for not only visibility, but also rationalizing that data down to something which is contextual and can help us fundamentally focus on the right things for the business. And I think at the moment, and for the past decade, we have literally been fighting a war with events and alerts, and we're losing that war.
Yep.
So we need to change the dynamic there to really focus in on, yes, we can have 10,000 alerts, but what's the thing that's going to impact my business operations or my business resilience? That's what the only thing you should care about.
Right. Risk-based. So how does Armis fit into that higher, ultimately at the top of the world, you probably got some in the modern infrastructure, you've got like an XDR and a SIM for collecting data. Where does Armis play into that? Does it try and act like a SIM? Does it feed the SIM? Does it take, you start talking about, you got input from like things like CASB solutions, you've got all these different components that could cloud, software as a service, which is really almost the Internet of Things of its own version of SaaS type services. So how do you see this hierarchy together? If you were looking to deploy something in a large enterprise right now to get a handle on it, what components would you be alerting?
It's a great question. And the way we look at the world is Armis is a big data machine. We have inputs and we have outputs. Simple as that. We input as many sources of telemetry we can from as many areas as we can, and we rationalize that data down to something which is useful. And then it's all about sharing that data. I say data federation is the new kind of buzzword, and federating that data to IT systems, to CMDBs, to EDRs, to SIMs, to SOARs, to whatever else you need to make your SOC practice, your NOC practice more efficient. So you think of Armis as that brain, that intelligence, to giving that context over to various systems. A classic example of this is ServiceNow. And we work really, really well with ServiceNow to make them more accurate and provide a bigger picture of what's going on.
Great. So where does this on the asset inventory, how do you even start tracking what you were calling these secondary assets? How do you the inventory gets so complex, like you were saying, you start drowning in data, but you can't get information out of it. So do you look into those as needed? How do you proactively say you got old firmware or whatever, it could be an old VM running some old Windows. How do you deal with those secondary assets today?
Yeah, so the way Armis looks at this is we look at many, many, many different factors, hundreds of different factors about that particular asset. And we compute a risk score from that asset.
Okay.
And a great example, and we'd actually just released this, we call it asset vulnerability management. And of course, typically for non-IT assets, you can't scan them because you don't know they even exist. Right. So we're automatically doing this passive assessment of vulnerabilities and across all assets. And then we're overlaying and enriching that data that we see to say, I see these assets over here, they're connected to the internet. They are these types of devices because we know them. And they've actually got known exploits on them. These are critical systems. So we're helping to, again, rationalize and focus in and prioritize where the SOC team should be looking at for primary, secondary, whatever assets are out there. And that's the holy grail. That's what we have to get to is that prioritization.
Right. Just enhancing the context so you can actually make good risk calls on it based on context, to access the internet, things like that. That makes a lot of sense. So, well, it looks like the future is going to be pretty bright. It's been very bright for Armis, just given where the world's headed. Look forward to working with you more in the future. Chris, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, Peter. So as I mentioned, I did some internet stalking before this, and I found this awesome house that you built. Right, super cool. I myself am a mid-century modern enthusiast. I live in one actually, but so being a tech guy that got to build a kind of modern home, what kind of tech did you put into that house?
So yeah, the beauty with building your own home and being a tech geek as I am is you go a bit crazy. You start building in an amazing amount of smarts into the house. So you can both see behind me, there's a full 44 rack unit. So
I was going to mention that. I saw that.
That's full of Lutron and Control 4 systems. We have this property about 260 IP addresses.
Wow.
Roughly speaking. And
what's the most bizarre? What's the most bizarre thing you had that would be the front leading, type of application of the whole IP ranges?
That's a really good question. It's just fun to see all these quirky little things, these extenders and sensors, and we have sensors in the concrete to measure the temperature gradients and it feeds back. Also, we have hydronic solar on the roof. That's also IP connected. Oh. Even our boiler system is IP connected back to the manufacturer, so they can monitor the boiler's efficiencies. So it's a pretty unique home for that perspective, but yeah, it's kind of fun to put tech into action and make it work for you. Do you
have Armis scanning that so it discovers those devices so you can throw those in your database also?
Oh yes, yeah, I know exactly where they are and what they're doing.
They're running correctly.
Yeah, exactly.
That is really great. Now the next thing you'll need is a budget to keep up with technology as all the new widgets come out that can monitor more and more things over time.
Yeah, no, the sensors become cheaper and smaller, and 5G obviously increases the density that we can put into a radio network. Right. We're going to see a ton more devices out there, probably on the order of 500 billion in about 10 years.
Yeah, and then, it's everything autonomous, and the world's going to change a lot over the next decade. There's no doubt about it.
It really will. It really will.
Cool. Well, Peter, thanks for being on IT Trendsetters. Look forward to this episode coming out pretty soon.
Very good. Thank you, guys. Thanks,
Kirk. Thank you, Peter.
Bye. Thanks, Peter. Good meeting you.
Thanks.